Dunkirk is a movie set in World War II in 1940 on the beach of, well, you guessed it, Dunkirk, directed by Christopher Nolan and music composed by the one and only Hans Zimmer, and of course I should say the one and only Christopher Nolan for the directing. I already said he directs, but how could I not give him the same honor as Hans Zimmer? They both did such an amazing job on this film, and I want to say I'm sorry that my review is so late, but it came out late in my country, so I saw it as soon as I could, and here is my review of Dunkirk. Now, the thing about Dunkirk is that the characters are not developed as much as your typical film or even war film. They are developed to the point where you care about some of them, but not so developed that they take away from what Dunkirk was. And I think that is the beauty of this film, the fact that you can appreciate people like the old man on the boat who went and saved people, just like the countless other civilian boats in Dunkirk, that you can appreciate the RAF pilots who took down bombers and Luftwaffe planes to stop the bombing runs on Dunkirk. And even you can just appreciate the people on the ground who needed the saving, that were steadfast and did their best to stay alive. That's what Dunkirk is about. It's about the event itself. It starts in the brunt of it. It starts with the gunfire, and it ends with the people being, saved, or at least many of the people being saved. But that's what it is. It's this massive battle. But not in like a Michael Bay way, in a Christopher Nolan way, which is the best kind of way for this sort of thing, in my opinion. Now, nothing could have prepared me for what I was going to witness in this theater when it came to the sound and the imagery. Like, oh my gosh, when those first bullets echoed through the movie theater, it was an experience to behold. Like, my seat literally was shaking because of bombs, gunfire, plane engines, things like that. The sound design was out of this world, and you can tell that they intentionally made it loud so that you would, to some degree, experience what these people experienced. And even just watching it in the movie house, it could be so startling at times and just so stark. Like, honestly, there were times where you would just, not expect and be like, oh, whoa, what the hell? Like, it was amazing. It was such an immersive film. And not only that, the action in this film is great, and not in a Michael Bay way. Like, the air battles are the best example of this. It's not like a CGI crap fest. The bullets are just like grrr, grrr. It's very restrained. It looks like real bullets. It doesn't look like the CGI where it's very, flashy bullets and then massive, and you can see them very clearly, and then when it hits the plane becomes this massive fireball. No, what happens is the bullets look real. You can hardly see them in the daylight, but they are visible, and then when it hits a plane, it takes a while, but then the smoke comes out and it starts dive bombing, which is what would actually happen. It wasn't Michael Bay-anized, where it literally just blows up into a massive flame ball straight away, right? That's what I loved about this film, is just the realism in it, and also the stakes. Like, for example, just the emotional roller coaster that everyone went through. Like, there were three things, as I stated: the sea, with the civilians going to go help the people in Dunkirk, and that scene where you saw them all come in was just breathtaking, by the way. Then you had the air, where it was the RAF just trying to suppress the bombers and trying to suppress the fighters from killing the people on the beaches and all that kind of stuff, and bombing the boats and things like that. And then you had the land, which was the people who were the most vulnerable, just trying to stay alive while they get rescued or potentially get rescued. And the stakes were so high because, there were these moments of, are we going to make it? And, who do we have to sacrifice to survive? Things like that, And it wasn't necessarily like they sacrificed anyone, or they did or they didn't or whatever, but it was like that was in people's heads. And that was the great thing, is that this movie didn't even have that much gore. It had a lot of stark imagery, for example, of burning oil on water and people burning to death in the water and stuff like that. But there wasn't any limbs flying off in broad daylight or anything. But this movie, in my opinion, still surpasses Saving Private Ryan in terms of brutality. That's how well this movie is acted. That's how well the sound design goes with the movie. That's how well the music goes with the movie. That's how well all the acting is done in the movie, that with so little gore, the stark imagery, the acting, the music, just the circumstances they're in can surpass a movie like Saving Private Ryan, where the guy has his guts out on a beach screaming, "Mama, Mama." Like, you know what I'm trying to say? Like, they didn't even need that, and this movie already felt more realistic, more stark in imagery, more high stakes, and honestly, it was such a ride being in that theater. This is the best war film I have ever experienced, in my opinion. Now, that is my opinion, and I feel like there are going to be people who don't enjoy this movie as much as I did, because the thing I liked about this movie is it developed characters enough to a point where you sort of cared about them, but it didn't detract, once again, from what Dunkirk was. Now, there are going to be people who might go into this movie and expect these massive character arcs and it just focusing on one or two characters in Dunkirk, but that's not what this movie is about. It's about the big battle of Dunkirk. It's about showing the miracle of Dunkirk. It's about showing all the cogs that went into making Dunkirk possible. It's about showing the heroism of the pilots. It's about showing the determination of the people on the beaches trying to stay alive. And it's about showing the courage of those civilians who took their boats with no guns on their way to go save soldiers where they could have easily been burnt, scuttled, bombed, shot, taken as prisoners of war, that kind of thing. And just the fact that everyone was willing to do what they needed to do to get off there and to help people get off there was a wonderful spectacle to see on film, right? And it was handled so well. Like, I've heard complaints about this movie of, it didn't have enough dialogue, but it had more than enough dialogue. Like, people aren't always going to be talking and chattering in a situation like this. There was dialogue when it was needed, and there was no dialogue when it felt right. And some people had a problem with that. I thought it was a perfect amount of dialogue, a perfect amount of silence. Now let's talk about the characters in this film again, because as I said, they're not super fleshed out, but they're fleshed out enough that you care about some of them. But here's the thing. For me, I'm pretty sure you've seen both of them in the trailers. There was Tom Hardy playing one of the RAF pilots, pretty much the main one, and then there was the old guy who was one of the civilians going to go help the soldiers at Dunkirk and evacuate them. Those are my two favorites because they both showed such courage in the face of almost certain doom, okay? Like, the freaking pilot was so great, He had such high stakes going on him, but he did what he needed to do. And I'm not going to reveal it for those who haven't seen it, but there is a scene with the pilot near the end of the movie that was breathtaking. It was breathtaking at first, and it was suspenseful as well. It just blended beauty, tranquility, and then suspense all so well together. I loved that scene. It was probably my favorite part of the entire film. Even though I said that the characters aren't super fleshed out, this is still a very character-driven movie. It is always focusing on the characters and how they're dealing with Dunkirk and how they're dealing with the situation, right? It's so great. And there's a character in this movie, I'm not going to exactly, explain what happens because, again, spoilers, but there was a character in this movie where he is introduced and then there is a scene where you see him at nighttime, and I was like, oh, that is a cool plot point. What I will say is I didn't feel very connected to the people on land. I felt their struggle. I felt for them when crap went down, when crap didn't go their way, things like that. But I felt much more for the pilot and for the people on the civilian boat than I did for the people on land who were waiting to be rescued, funnily enough. Now, again, as I said, I felt their struggle, but I just felt like way more compelled to be rooting for that RAF pilot or RF pilots, and to be rooting for that one civilian boat. Obviously the other ones, but they only focused on one of the civilian boats mainly. I think this is going to be my first time I give this score on my channel for a review, but I am going to give Dunkirk an A+. So deserving of that A+. Dunkirk, you are the best war movie I have ever seen. Music was great. Acting was great. The imagery was stark and amazing. The sound design was out of this world and breathtaking. It was all just breathtaking. And I will say one thing about this movie that would sum up my feelings perfectly. I didn't realize it, but when the credits rolled, and I did listen to the music for a bit because it was wonderful music. When the credits rolled, like, I took my hands off of my knees because that's just where they were, and I realized my hands are so sweaty. And it was not warm in that movie house, okay? My hands were so sweaty. I was pretty much white-knuckled the whole time, but I didn't realize that my hands had gotten so sweaty, so that should tell you what to expect for Dunkirk. It is such a great movie. If you haven't seen it, I really do recommend it. Now, that being said, it isn't one of those war movies that I can watch and over again, but I'll definitely watch it again in my lifetime. My favorite war movie. I'm so happy to say that. Thank you, Christopher Nolan, Hans Zimmer, and everyone else involved for creating such an authentic and wonderful, breathtaking, and just amazing experience. It was just, if there was one film to see in the cinema, it was that, okay? At first, I thought Star Wars: The Force Awakens was the best film experience I had in terms of being in the cinema. And I watched that in IMAX, okay? In IMAX 3D. This I watched in 2D at a normal cinema, and this blew that out of the water in terms of spectacle, in terms of sound design, music, everything. So go watch this movie, guys. It is worth your top dollar. Please support this movie. It is just amazing. Anyway, guys, this has been Randy Andy. You know what to do. If you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.